Gabon is a land of great natural beauty. It lies on the west coast of Central Africa. The equator passes directly through this nation. Lush rainforests cover much of its territory. These forests are home to diverse wildlife. Gorillas and elephants roam freely here. Gabon's coastline stretches along the Atlantic Ocean. This provides access to marine resources. The country is rich in minerals. These resources have shaped its history. Before European arrival, Gabon was home to various peoples. The Mayeni, Fang, Punu and others lived here. They were skilled in agriculture. They grew crops like yams and plantains. Fishing was very important along the coast and rivers. Hunting in the dense forests provided food and materials. These communities lived in harmony with nature. Their societies were organized in villages and clans. Trade existed between different groups. Early trade networks crisscrossed the region. These networks were vital for communities. They exchanged local goods. Items like ivory were highly valued. Sadly, the slave trade also touched this land. European traders arrived from the 15th century onwards. The late 19th century saw France establish control. Gabon officially became a French colony. This was part of the scramble for Africa. French administrators arrived to govern the territory. They imposed new laws and systems. The traditional ways of life were disrupted. Colonial rule aimed to benefit France. Local needs were often secondary. This period set the stage for resource extraction. The French colonial economy focused on raw materials. Timber was a key resource. Okoum wood, unique to this region, was highly prized. It was perfect for making plywood. Vast forests were logged to supply European markets. Rubber also became an important commodity. Wild rubber was collected from the forests. This exploitation had a significant impact. The natural environment began to change. The local Gabonese people faced many hardships. They were often forced to work. This was common in timber camps and rubber collection. Conditions were frequently harsh and unfair. Communities were sometimes displaced from their ancestral lands. After World War II, global dynamics shifted. Colonial empires began to weaken. There was a greater push for development in colonies. France started to invest more in Gabon's infrastructure. This included improvements in education and healthcare, though still limited. Economic activities began to diversify slightly. The winds of change were blowing across Africa. Gabon was no exception to this trend. New mineral discoveries brought fresh economic interest. Manganese was found in Mwanda in the 1950s. This became a major export. Uranium was also discovered and mining began. These resources added to Gabon's wealth. However, this wealth was still largely controlled by foreign companies. The benefits for the local population remained limited. The economy was still very much resource-based. This dependence would continue for decades. Oil exploration began in earnest during this period. The search for black gold was on. Early discoveries were made in the late 1950s. These finds were initially modest. Section 4. Black gold rushes independence and the oil boom dominance. Gabon gained independence from France on August 17, 1960. Léon Mba became its first president. The new nation faced the task of building its own future. The late 1960s and early 1970s brought a great change. Significant offshore oil reserves were discovered. This was a turning point for Gabon's economy. Oil production increased rapidly. Gabon became a substantial oil exporter. The 1973 global oil crisis caused prices to soar. The era of the oil boom had truly begun. The oil revenues fueled rapid economic growth. Gabon's gross domestic product, or GDP, increased dramatically. In the mid-1970s, GDP per capita was among the highest in Africa. Large-scale infrastructure projects were launched. The Trans-Gabon Railway was a major undertaking. New roads, ports, and public buildings were constructed. Libreville, the capital, saw significant development. Section 5. Economic tides turn. Volatility and adjustments in the late 20th century. The mid-1980s brought a harsh reality check. Global oil prices collapsed dramatically in 1986. Gabon's economy, so reliant on oil, suffered a severe blow. Government revenues plummeted. The era of easy money from oil ended abruptly. This exposed the underlying weaknesses of the economy. The lack of diversification became a critical problem. The country found itself in a difficult financial situation. With falling revenues, Gabon accumulated significant national debt. The government had borrowed heavily during the boom years. Now it struggled to meet its obligations. It turned to international financial institutions for help. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank stepped in. They provided loans but also required changes. Gabon had to implement structural adjustment programs known as SAPs. These programs aimed to stabilize the economy. The SAPs involved austerity measures, government spending was cut, public sector jobs were reduced, state-owned enterprises were privatized. These measures were painful for many Gabonese people. Social services were affected, unemployment rose. Section 6. Seeking new paths, diversification efforts in the new millennium. The 21st century saw calls for economic diversification. Gabon's leadership recognized the dangers of over-reliance on oil. Oil reserves were finite and prices unpredictable. Presidents Omar and Ali Bongo Ondimba promoted diversification. The goal was a resilient, sustainable economy. This was a significant challenge. Old habits and structures were hard to change. Several sectors were targeted for development. Mining, beyond oil, was one area. Gabon became the world's second-largest manganese producer. Iron ore exploration showed promise. Forestry was another focus. Efforts promoted sustainable logging practices. A ban on raw log exports was implemented in 2010. This aimed to encourage local wood processing and create jobs. Ecotourism was identified as a potential growth area. The Gabon Emergent Strategic Plan was launched. This plan outlined a vision for 2025. It had 3 pillars: Green Gabon, Industrial Gabon, and Services Gabon. Section 7. Contemporary currents. Recent turmoil and Gabon's future economic voyage. The early 2020s brought new economic shocks. The COVID-19 pandemic hit global economies hard. Gabon was not spared. Lockdowns and travel restrictions affected trade and economic activity. Oil prices initially fell, further straining government finances. The pandemic highlighted the need for economic resilience. It also put pressure on healthcare systems. Recovery has been a slow process for many sectors of the Gabonese economy. A major political event occurred in August 2023. A military coup d'état took place. This removed President Ali Bongo Ondimba from power. A transitional government was established, led by General Brice Oligui Nguema. Such events often create economic uncertainty. International partners and investors watch closely. The coup raised questions about political stability. It also brought promises of tackling corruption and improving governance. The long-term economic impact is still unfolding. Today, in May 2025, Gabon faces considerable economic challenges. National debt remains a concern. Unemployment, especially among young people, is high. The economy is still heavily reliant on oil production. This makes it vulnerable to global energy transitions and price swings. Inclusive growth is a major goal.